what I decided to talk about today was show and tell. And Sol and I had talked about this idea quite a bit, and really dealing with personal narratives of education in the arts, because we both have this connection with art and we both have the background in the arts. But I really wanted to talk about how we interpret our world depends heavily on what we see in it. In other words, me coming here, for example, I thought, I kept seeing people walk up to these machines stuck in walls, and I kept thinking, wow, that's really interesting. The ATMs are on the outside of buildings, you know. And come to find out, I quickly learned that when I needed money, it wasn't an ATM, it was actually a cigarette machine. And so something we don't have in our culture. It's something, there's no cigarette vending machines on walls or anything of that sort. So, and I encountered them in place after place after place. And so I was like, wow, you know, how does that impact the culture here? But I just want to give you a definition of show and tell. Show and tell really is a classroom exercise in which children display an item and talk about it. And it can also be a public display or a demonstration. And so that's kind of what this is today. It's a show and tell. It's a show and tell of just some of my life histories and who I am and my art and how it's impacted by story and how it's impacted by education. There are 3 stages of show and tell in the classroom. The first stage is the introduction, where the student introduces themselves. The second stage is they display the object or show the object. And then the third part of show and tell is this idea of the story. They tell a story about it, or they tell us about the object and what it means to them and why it's important. And so that's kind of what we do as artists. We have an introduction. Somebody says, oh, that's so-and-so. And then you see the artwork, which is the object. And then there's always some kind of story behind the object. And it doesn't matter even if they didn't mean for it to have a story, even if they meant it to be totally non-objective. There is a story and a process behind it. For me, the introduction kind of represents the story connection, where the beginning is. This is me in the middle. I call it the glance. And I just use 2 totally stereotypical people to represent my parents. My mom is Norwegian, and very Norwegian, and my dad is Native American. And so when people from different countries, I say my mom's Norwegian, and they immediately think of this Norwegian persona. She does not look like that. And when I say my dad's Native American, that's exactly what they think. They think he's this Indian and he's got a bow and arrow and he's wearing moccasins. My dad does not look like that. But again, it's the stories that people conjure in their head that also impact how we come to know ourselves and how we come to know what's there. And so as a result, that's me. I'm half of each of those, and that's what you get in the middle. There are many artists that have influenced my story. Most recently, an artist named Donnie Varnell. He's from Sitka, Alaska, and he's a young artist. He's around in his 30s. And how he's influenced is he's taken an old traditional way of woodworking and made it and put it in contemporary context for his culture. He's Haida. He's a quarter Haida. So he's like me. He's kind of this dilute, this half-breed, this diluted indigenous person who is taking traditional culture and traditional roles and making them his own. There's some Scandinavian artists that I really, really have enjoyed that have also impacted me. Tinu Gunnarsdottir, she casts these tusks from whale tooth kind of tusks, and use them as hooks. And again, very Scandinavian, very functional, a lot of the stuff, but also very, very aesthetic. And so I really appreciated Hella Paulina Brynjolfsdottir and Margrethe Jonsdottir. They created this set of ceramic ware and a whole table place setting based on contemporary contexts in art. And then, of course, things like the raven. Of course, the raven impacts me because it's my Northwest Coast heritage. It's also part of Indian tradition. And then here you find it also in Scandinavian cultures. So there's this thread that runs through. Again, these are all stories that are inspiring me as I create work and how I look at it. The story, or this represents the artifact and involves a plan, and in some cases no plan is the plan. And so when we talk about learning and what we're doing and why we're doing it, No plan is the plan, and both always involve process. Whether you have a plan or you don't have a plan, they certainly involve process. You have to go through a process to get there. And I guess that's really where, for me, the story also morphs in that process. So for me, art making and creative research, I work in all kinds of mixed media materials. And again, I can only tell you that story really is an emphasis for me. And for me, it deals with the conflictual in society, the consensual in society, but it's a way of adding my own voice and how we add our own voices to the process. Artistic narratives of knowledge, reflecting my own version of the truth. Art is truth, right? It's our truth. So it's kind of fascinating. Somebody asked me today, how does the story impact you? Well, the story impacts what materials I use. Like, for example, 2 blankets and a handkerchief. You know, yeah. So, I mean, I use 2 blankets and a handkerchief. And so if I want to tell, depending on what story I want to tell and how I want to tell it, it impacts the materials I use, the process I use, and whether I'm going to do it intuitively or whether I'm going to plan it out and set it up and move. One of the other pieces that I've done most recently is a public sculpture in Arkansas, and it's called Voices of Our Ancestors, and it is really talks, I made it because it's a story of my grandmother's grandmother, and her name is Diodima, and she was born on the Trail of Tears. If you know anything about American history, Indian removal was really important, and or to Andrew Jackson. So he removed the Indians and put them on this place that was awful in Oklahoma. And basically, so this is a tribute. Diodima was left, because she was born on the Trail of Tears, she was left in a log next to a house where white folks lived. And she was taken care of by the white folks, and they named her Jane. So they gave her an American name, or an English name. And they called her Jane Bartlett. She was raised there for 7 years, and then her parents came back to claim her. And so this talks about the Trail of Tears and about the different pieces. Around this sculpture are stones, and they're kind of in a hopscotch pattern, kind of a little game, a hopping game. So the kids can actually hop around the sculpture. In the meantime, within the sculpture, if you see the handprint, and I don't know if you can see it right here, if you push that handprint, some chimes will erupt, and the sound will come out the top. And so that's music that they basically are dancing to when it comes into play. So for me, I just really like to investigate 3 aspects related to art practice and education. There's a gap between theory and practice. A lot of artists don't grasp theoretical concerns or understand what's, how do I say it in a good way? A lot of artists are aware of where they're at, but they're not aware of where other people are at, or how to connect with other things. And so, so that's one of my things, is I'd like to see how we all connect together and make meaning as artists. So the 3 ideas of show and tell represent the entirety of purpose. In other words, the introduction, how you introduce yourself as an artist, and I say introduce loosely, how you're perceived as an artist, what things you show as artistry, and the story behind them, whether there's a conscious story or an unconscious story, and all this creates purpose. And basically for me, I can only speak for myself, but I think it's pretty across the board. It's cultivated and honed as an individualistic skill, and we need to continue that to give voice to not only our culture, but to people around us and people who don't have that voice or won't use it. And you see here Norman Rockwell's Girl in the Mirror in 1954. She sees herself in a very accurate way. But then you move on to this 2011 Unknown titled portrait, and she's seeing herself in new ways, and she's wishing and dreaming. And that's what we do as artists. Sometimes we see the true reflection, and sometimes we see ourselves in ways that we would like to be. And I think that that's really what show and tell is all about in our artistry, is seeing ourselves and seeing our culture and seeing the people in our country in new ways, and how people can voice that. So it's kind of fun. For me, teaching, and that's part of what I do as well, involves the curriculums of life. I want to prepare people, not just educators, but also artists, advocates for the arts, everyone, how to cross over to the different areas. I was just talking about it this morning with Judith, actually, and how we have different languages in each section. In academia, we have different languages. In galleries, we have different languages. In the public, we have different languages that we use. And how do we intersect those languages, and how do we communicate so there is a holistic view and a really nice communication? It's really difficult. So, and then the last thing is also becoming learners and and teachers ourselves. As we teach through our art, and even though we're artists, we are teaching through our objects in some way. Even if someone just comes up and looks at an object and doesn't even know what it is or can't even fathom what it means, the mind starts working to make connections. And so we are teaching through our art, no matter how we think or what we think. And it might be emotional teaching. It might be a response like, oh, or great, or or whatever. It's a teaching tool. It is happening. So, and so part of that is that art is teaching, but we are also learning as artists as well as teaching. So it's this reciprocal catch-22 process. And being pedagogical, in other words, being in that process of teaching and learning and teaching and learning and teaching through our art, we find a balance between traditional ideas and forward and innovative thinking. And I think that's what's the most important, is to create this forward and innovative thinking, to cause people to change, not to believe the way we believe, but to change them for who they wish to become. And I think art does that. I think it changes us and helps us become who we wish to become, or what we wish and what we hope. And really, that's really all I have to say about it. So, yeah.